Welcome to the Understanding Boys podcast. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which this podcast is recorded, the Boonwurrung people of the Kulin Nation. We pay our respects to their leaders past, present and emerging. The Understanding Boys podcast is a series of conversations exploring what it is to be a good man these days. And if you had a story that you could tell a boy of, say, 14 and he'd listen, what would that story be? And that's really what I'm asking our guests today. I'm Dr Swann, and we're a community of teachers and parents concerned with the education and growth of boys and young men in the modern world. This series is brought to you by Brighton Grammar, an all-boys school in Melbourne. To learn more about the podcast, please visit understandingboys.com.au. Dr Arne Rubinstein is internationally recognised for his work in the Rites of Passage movement. He's an expert in child development and was nominated in 2008 for Australian of the Year. In our conversation today, we talk about Rites of Passage, about some of the elements you can use at home. He shares some stories and also the powerful effect of Rites of Passage that he's witnessed in the community. I hope you enjoy our podcast today. So welcome to the Understanding Boys podcast. Arne Rubinstein. Arne, it's great to have the opportunity to chat with you today.
Great to be here. Thank you, Ray.
One of the things that I've always been amazed about your work, and I remember for our listeners, I've been quite fortunate. I've done a bit of work with Arne. I've done some of his training, and I remember walking down the street I think it was in Byron Bay, and we were chatting, getting a coffee or something, and this young man just walks up. It's like, Arne. And he starts talking to you, and it turned out he was someone who was on your program, one of your Rites of Passage programs, but I think, like 10 or 15 years ago. And what amazed me about it wasn't necessarily that he recognised you, but that you actually also recognised him. And I think it's amazing that so many of, you must have done, thousands of kids and programs over the years, and yet you have that recognition of so many of the people that whose lives you've affected. That must be pretty amazing for you.
It is amazing. And look, I think I'm very privileged in that we get to do Rites of Passage programs with boys. And one of the core aims of it is to find the gifts in each of the boys. What's their talent, their genius, their spirit? And when you find it, there's a number of things happen. You have to actually not only find it, but you have to name it and name it to the boy. And that changes something in their lives when they actually are being seen by older men and other people, and they shine. And that creates incredible moments. And I remember a lot of them. And yes, I'm incredibly fortunate that I can be anywhere in Australia or even in the world. And people come up to me and they go, we did that program and it was 10 years ago, 20 years ago now, and it's changed our lives. And that's one of my greatest joys, is to hear people talking about how this work, the impact it can have.
It's amazing, isn't it? Just in that moment, just to be truly seen and then to be truly acknowledged, just how speaking to that and drawing that out of someone by witness, as you say, by, a community, just the powerful and transformational effect that can have, and really, having seen it, the lights go on, the faces light up, and they're different. It's really quite remarkable.
Yeah, we all need it, actually, to be honest. The boy in all of us needs it, but especially the teenagers around about 14, 15, 16, that awkward stage when they're lost, confused, not sure, whatever it is, uncertain, and all of a sudden they're being told by older men in front of a community, actually, we think you are amazing, and we recognise that in you have certain gifts. And, some of them, their gifts are around leadership, but others it's around just kindness and caring, or artistic ability, or, a different form of intelligence. And when we recognise those gifts, then it actually gives them permission to bring that out into the world. And interestingly, a gift is only a gift if you give it away. It has to be given to be a gift. And so in the long term of it is that these gifts that the boys have then become gifts to the community. And that was the aim of a Rite of Passage, to recognise in each of the individuals what is the gift that person brings to their community, and to name it and to invite it to come out for the greater good.
So if I was a parent listening now and thinking about, this sounds fantastic, and having done your training, I know that you often refer to that as an honouring, like taking a moment out and really acknowledging. Is that something that our listeners and parents might be able to create a space around and actually be able to do it even at home?
Absolutely, and we really encourage that, and we especially encourage it it can be at particular times like birthdays or Christmas or family gatherings, where we actually ask, if we do it to one or more of the children, we say, okay, we're going to do something, and while we do this, you just sit there and don't say anything, and then people who are there have an opportunity to tell that boy or girl what are the things that we admire about them, what are the things that we see, the gifts, what do we love about them. And it's a fabulous thing to do, but also it's something that parents can just do one-on-one with their kids at random times and just say, look, I've seen you doing this and that, and I just want to say that I really see that you have a fabulous gift in whatever it is I see, and to name it and then to give an example of it. And if I was saying something to you, I'll give you an example. To you, Ray, I'd say, you have a gift for wanting to get positive work for boys out in the world. And the fact that you're doing this podcast, and that's one of the top 10 podcasts for parenting in Australia and the top 15 or 20 in New Zealand, and you keep coming back to it and getting extraordinary guests on it and doing it in the way that you do, that's a gift, Ray. And so I honour that as a gift in you, but that gift, I think it's something that you love, but it also benefits all the tens of thousands of parents around the country and around the world who listen to it.
And it's interesting as you say that, of course, I'm feeling uncomfortable and a bit awkward and, a bit embarrassed and all those things. And I'm, as a parent, as you know, I've got kids, and there's a degree of awkwardness around it in a sense, which really, considering how beautiful it is to both give and receive, it shouldn't be there. But do you have any advice, or we say whether it's normalising or just making it a bit, are there any kind of guidelines that you'd throw out, and just in terms of creating the space for it to happen, or is it just a case of you just be bold and back yourself?
Look, it's a bit of both. I think personally that we really need a pretty major review of some of our parenting techniques and some of our educational techniques, and that's sort of the work that we've been involved in for the last 25 years. And so it's part of a bigger picture of, we, for example, encourage parents to spend time one-on-one with each of their children, preferably with the mobile phone off, just with an activity that both enjoy doing. And it may be walking the dog or listening to music or cooking, or there's a billion different things it could be, but just spending that time. And that is an opportunity to grow the relationship, and then to give our boys an opportunity, if there's a question they want to ask or something that they want to talk about, that's the sort of time it will come up. And it's also a perfect opportunity for parents to say to their children, at some stage, maybe towards the end, hey, I just want to tell you that I've noticed that you are, doing your work a lot better and you're more organised. And I just want to say I really honour that you've improved in that way. And, it's about, at its most simple form, it's about reinforcing the positive. And we all see, our children are real. None of them are perfect. None of us are perfect. But if we can, the trick is, if we can reinforce the positive in them, and then create a situation where we allow them to find the areas that they need to improve in themselves, then we create a whole scenario for growth. What often happens is it goes the other way around, and we tell our children what they're doing wrong, and then they sort of get defensive and communication breaks down. But the principle is with with children, with anyone, is if we tell them what they do well and we give them an opportunity to reflect on and talk about, and often we have to do it by example, things that they or we could all be doing better, that's when things change. Yeah,
and it's like it creates a sense of abundance, isn't it? It's a virtuous cycle. So they receive that information, they feel good, they have more available energy and resources to then use that gift or talent or character strength and then take that out into the world. And it sort of pays it forward in a way, because these kids are getting, the nourishment that they need. And, you say about, and receiving those things. I can remember again on one of your programs, a gentleman, saying some things, just how powerful, it really was to receive that, because he really knew. It was really amazing. Yeah. And it was someone else.
It's powerful, it's emotional. And we've got to remember that what we're dealing with also is our children are being exposed to so much stuff in the media and internet, and they're being given a model which actually is highly inappropriate for many of them. And the basic philosophy of our work is every child is different. Every child has their own personal learning process, and every child has their own gifts. And our role as parents and educators is to support them on their personal journey that is going to bring out the best in them, to help them find their own gifts, to help them find the things that could potentially get in the way of them reaching their potential, and then work out how they can overcome those things. To do that, rather than, my worry always is that when they're left to their own devices, they think they have to be like, who they're seeing on the internet, and they think they all need to, be tough, and they're not allowed to show emotions, they're not allowed to be vulnerable, they have to be able to drink a lot, treat women badly. I mean, the modelling that they're seeing is so often so bad, and we need to support them to work out for themselves who they want to be and to create their own set of values that are healthy for them.
Yeah, because I understand, in your previous life, in previous work, you've seen the opposite. You've seen the impact of things when they don't go well. And for the listeners who aren't aware, Arne was a doctor for a long period of time in emergency medicine and probably saw a lot of outcomes where kids, and particularly adolescents, engaged in risk-taking behaviour or, in events or accidents or mishaps or challenges that really left them in really difficult situations. Is that part of what led you into this work and your work around Rites of Passage?
Absolutely, it is. And basically what I saw was, I call it an over-representation of teenagers in the emergency department. And I saw all these teenage boys coming in who had done things that were, often had long-term consequences, and that would involve wheels, speed, and height, any 2 out of 3. So anything they could jump over, jump out of, jump through, and the faster they were going and the higher it was, the better. And sometimes the outcome was disastrous. And one of the things that we clearly see in boys is that if they create a jump or a ramp or something like that and they successfully complete what they're trying to do, the next thing they do is they go and make it bigger or higher. And it can only end in one way. And I realised that these boys are actually trying to do something that will make them feel like a man. And they're trying to create their own form of initiation or rite of passage, and they're trying to face death because that's what men can do, and all of these things. And there is no process that's created for them. And then I looked at Indigenous communities around the world and realised that every Indigenous and traditional community would create a rite of passage for their boys, and they would all do the same things, different according to the cultural environment, but the same concept. So they'd always create a challenge for them, and they'd always share their stories with them. And that I recognise the elements, and like, hey, we could still be doing this. We just need to make it appropriate for the times that we're in and where we are. But if we do that, it will have a profound effect, because we will support these boys to go through a shift from how a boy thinks to how a healthy young man or adult thinks, which is very important, and I'd like to talk about that in a little bit. But if we can do that well, we will actually change their lives for the better. And so it kind of, one of those things that started kind of accidentally about 25 years ago and has taken over my life to the point where we're now running the Rites of Passage Institute and set up programs in schools all over Australia and about 50 countries around the world.
Which is extraordinary. I just want to take the listeners back to what you said right at the start, where you were talking about young men and boys creating the conditions for challenge. I just, I've heard you say that before, and I just think it's there's so much in that, so that essentially if we just look at it as a societal pattern that these kids are engaging this risk-taking behaviour, they want to challenge themselves to prove that they're men or that they're masculine, and so they create a challenge, they artificially create a challenge to kind of meet that. And it's almost like a cultural phenomenon, isn't it? It seems to defy like a logical kind of explanation. It's something almost like at a phenomenal level that occurs. And I guess maybe this is part of where a rites of passage does emerge in cultures as a collective response to what is experienced at an individual level.
Yeah, well, I think there is a logic to it as well, because they go from being a boy who's soft and cuddly and, not necessarily overly strong, and then in a fairly short period of time, they get tall and they get muscles and they get strong, and they're really bursting to know, how far can I push this? How far can I go? What are my limits? And, I've seen other men and I've seen them doing things, and I want to know what I can do. And often for boys, that actually means really pushing it to the limits. And in the Indigenous communities, they would create activities. It might be you have to go out and kill a wild animal, or you have to spend time on your own in the desert, or you have to climb something. And it was designed to actually push them and allow them to find their limits. Now, also back then, boys were going to become, warriors or hunters. And so it was also testing that they were ready to do those things. Today, there is still the desire to push themselves to the limit, and that means that we need to be finding creative ways to actually allow our boys to test their limits, but not in ways that they're going to kill or maim themselves for the rest of their lives. And the other thing is, our boys are not hopefully going to become hunters and warriors, but I think the main challenge today is around whether they're going to become men who contribute positively to the world and help the world continue in a healthy way, or whether they're going to become men who just take from the world and leave it in a worse place than it was. So when we create challenges for the boys, we do push them their limits, but we make sure it's safe. But we also push the boys and we say to them, what sort of man are you going to become? Who do you want to be? And what behaviours from your childhood do you need to let go of if you're going to become that man? And in our experience, when we do that with the boys, when we set up the right conditions and we do it, the boys, they love it. It's a powerful process for them, because also we live in so much now, we try and keep everyone safe, and we it's very soft and the resilience is not there. So when we create a situation where, they have to spend all night outside and not sleep, or they have to keep a fire going, or they have to do a solo or something like that, yes, it's hard for them, but when they achieve it, they have a sense of pride and a sense of knowing and a new force within them, which is actually very special. And especially if that can then be directed along with this idea of what sort of man do I want to be, if they use that newfound energy towards becoming the best men that they can be, that's a really big thing. Absolutely.
So it'd be useful, I think, for us as our listeners are tuning in, just to kind of get a sense of what actually is a rite of passage. So, what would be the simplest way, if I'd never come across this work before, but I sort of had a vague idea, how would you, in simple terms, describe it? It's, you go away, just talk us through what are the main elements?
So a rite of passage is something that transforms you from one stage in life to the next. And the classic one is a boy becoming a young man. Now, there are rites of passage just as importantly for girls, and we go through transformational times in our lives later on. But if we talk about boys, a rite of passage is an event that transforms a boy into a young man, into a man. Now, all boys are eventually going to become men, but that can happen through a healthy rite of passage that's facilitated and run by older men who have that boy's best interests at heart, or it can happen when that boy accidentally gets someone pregnant or has a bad accident in a car or loses their job or, all sorts of different things. And we are about trying to create healthy rites of passage. And in a healthy rite of passage, a boy taken away from their normal, setting for a period of time, which can be anywhere from days to weeks, with elders from their community, and they get to hear the stories of those elders, and stories are used as a way of passing on wisdom and knowledge. So they're not told what to do or how to live their lives. They hear stories and they work out for themselves how they want to be. The boys go through challenges, like I've described. The boys create a vision for their future as to what sort of men they want to be. And each of the boys is recognised and honoured by the men who are on their rite of passage as to what those men see in the boy as their gifts, their genius, their talent, or their spirit. And when you take a boy away, let him hear the stories of elders, put him through challenges, encourage him to make a vision, and honour him and tell him all the fabulous things that you admire and love about him, that changes him. And then hopefully he's welcomed back into the community as a young man, and he then starts to act as a young man, takes on the responsibilities of a young man, and is also able to handle the privileges of a young man. And just quickly, if we don't put our boys through a rite of passage, the danger is that they become men who still think and act like boys, who still think they're the centre of the universe, who still just want power for themselves, who can't handle their emotions when they don't get what they want, they have a temper tantrum, who think they're going to live forever, and who think women are there to be their mothers or their servants or their possessions. Could you imagine if these men ended up in major positions of power in politics or big business or running the world? It would be a disaster.
Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate the sentiment of the humour around that as well, Arne, that you're offering us. One question I had: if I was a single mum and separated, or the father had died, I mean, how do those kinds of family situations kind of access these programs?
Sure. Well, as we know, there are a lot of single mums now, and I always talk about how it's a responsibility of all the men to be making sure that all the boys go through a rite of passage, not just their own sons. And there are more and more organisations now around Australia, around New Zealand, around many countries in the world who are creating rites of passage programs for boys. And some of those programs the boys attend with their fathers or a male mentor or a grandfather or an uncle. Some of those programs the boys can just attend on their own. And one of the things that we do in the Rites of Passage Institute is we are very happy to support people to find rites of passage programs that are happening in their areas, or to help people create their own process and their own framework to be creating their own rites of passage.
And what are your thoughts, over time, I guess been doing this for 25 years and, there's been changes, I think, to, community expectations and standards and engagement with different, group members and so on. And what kinds of changes have you seen more broadly, even in your time in working on rites of passage? Where have been the major sort of influences coming from, do you think?
First of all, I think there have been enormous changes. So when I first started looking into rites of passage 25 years ago and talking about them, almost no one had heard about them. And then slowly over time, I'd talk to people and they'd sort of heard about it and they were interested, and then they'd heard about it and wanted to know more. And now in the last few years, we're getting schools and communities everywhere ringing us up saying, we want to do rites of passage. And I think what we're recognising, and this is partly influenced by the tsunami of technology that's in our sons' lives. Kids are being superheroes in their bedrooms, killing 1,000 gorgons before dinner and, in that world, but are really struggling in the real world, so to speak. And more schools are recognising that the education of our children has to be about way more than just getting a good year 12 mark. We need to be teaching them basic life skills. We need to be helping them to find out what's their true passion and purpose and values. We need to be mentoring them so that when they have questions, they have good people who they can speak to. And so that's the big thing that I'm seeing, is that there is this recognition that the levels of mental health issues that we have and those things are, unacceptable, and we really need to be looking at things differently. So definitely in my work, we've sort of shifted from trying to persuade people about the importance of this work to trying to manage the numbers of places where people are going, we need to be creating rites of passage for our children.
Mm-hmm. And I think, again, from a mum's perspective, the role of mum in this, if I'm sending them away with men and boys, what's the role for mums in this work, and how do they become involved in a meaningful way, which is not just in that sort of traditional mum and dad role way?
It's so important. And when we run our programs, we do it where the boys come with their father or a male mentor, but we also have a whole parallel program running for the mums, because what we say is it's not only the boys who are going through a rite of passage from boy to young man, mum and dad, but mum is going through a rite of passage from being the mum who sort of knows everything and supports everything that goes on. And we need to create a shift to one where the mother is available and maintains a close relationship with the boy, but not mothering in the same way as when the boy was, say, 8, 9 years of age. But it's about being available so that when the boy wants or needs to speak to mum or spend time with mum, that they can do that. But mum's also shifting, and her boy is about to go out into the world, and she's not going to know everything that goes on for him, and she's not going to be doing everything for him. He's going to have to be doing things for himself. And so there is a whole big letting go for the mum. And we try and support mums to work out what would be a healthier relationship moving forwards. And we do a process with the boys and mums together where they actually discuss it. What would be a healthier relationship in 5, 10 years' time? Because what we see is if the mums don't let go, unfortunately the boys will often end up pushing them away. And that pushing can even be physical. And we don't want that, and that's not okay. And ideally it's about the mum getting a new sense of freedom again in her life, but also maintaining an appropriate but different relationship with her son once he's a young man.
Because I imagine that's one of the challenges, if you were to participate in an experience like this and you come back and you reintegrate into a community that hadn't been through, the process. And you were chatting earlier about changing from boy behaviour, focusing on the self, and letting that go into, healthy adult behaviour and what that looks like. And you were describing, the change to the community. What are some of the other challenges, to reintegrate, do you see for kids that have gone through programs like this that you're aware of, and what can we be doing about them?
Yeah, well, it is. Rite of Passage is supposed to be a community event. And so I look at what happened traditionally and I go, well, how can we bring that into a modern context? So traditionally, the whole community would know that the boy was going off, and then the whole community would be there to welcome back the young man. And that young man would be seen and treated as a young man. And in fact, often they would dress them differently, or they'd give them a new tattoo or piercing or scar or something, which, we don't and can't do. It's not appropriate. But we do want the community to know when they're coming back as young men. So as often as possible when we're creating rites of passage, we try and do it within a community, and we will have the parents and family, friends and grandparents and as many people as we can there to welcome the young men back. And we'll introduce each of the young men back into the community. And so we need to think about, how can we create this? And we've now gotten to the point where part of our program actually involves a 6-week course after the program finishes that the young men do with their parents, so that we really try and integrate this well. And part of that is them talking about what sort of relationship they want to have, what privileges and responsibilities are reasonable, the parents getting a good opportunity to listen to the young man describing his vision and who he wants to be, so that we don't just run a great camp, we actually run a process that's going to have long-term benefits and change, so that more young men 10, 15 years after the camps will come running up to us in the street and go, hey, that program changed my life and continues to have impact. And we know that we can do that, and we know we can do it, including for boys with, from single mother families, boys from families, and everyone in the community goes through a shift when there's a healthy rite of passage.
Why is it that it's important to go away to do this work? Why can't it just be done, if it's community-based, why do we need to, get people away into a different space to make it happen?
Yeah, well, actually, I think it's even more important now. But when we looked at the stages of a rite of passage, they would always separate from the community, go through the transformation and come back and integrate. And it's like you can't do it while they're at school or at home. And part of the separating now is when we run our camps, there are no mobile phones, there are no watches, there are no computers, and we try and do it in nature. So, it's a period of time, and our camps are usually 4 or 5 days. Some people do it over a few days, some are longer, 10 days. It's that period of time uninterrupted to really listen to the stories that you're hearing from elders, to really go, okay, well, who am I, and who do I want to become, and what do I want to let go of? And if you're trying to do that, and you've got Snapchat and Facebook and phone calls coming through, it doesn't work. And so the more the person can be separated from day-to-day stuff and present and focused on it, the deeper they'll be able to go and the greater the genuine change that will occur.
And it's interesting, isn't it? I think for many of us who have been away on a holiday, it's not a holiday, I appreciate, but that sort of state change and a lot of the cues, I guess, the where things are and the how things are, when they're taken away or when they're not present, it does have it kind of builds a cocoon of sorts, doesn't it? It does change things. Yeah.
Which is what we want. And the other thing I haven't mentioned, but which is really important, is it's a rite of passage for the fathers as well. Like the boys step up into becoming young men, and our aim is that the fathers will also become better men and will review their own behaviours and look at, what do I need to let go of as a man, as a father? First of all, I'm going to have the best relationship and support my young man. But how do I need to be at home? How do I want to be in my relationships? How do I want to be in my community? So we challenge everyone who's on the rite of passage to look at, in the next stage of our lives, if we could be the best we could be, what's that going to look like?
And I think our listeners wouldn't be aware, but, we've done some work with Origin in the research space around this, and we've currently got some research at peer review level looking at the impact of the program, and certainly that was one of the things that we found was that the impact for the fathers was also significant. That was something that they really took away in terms of their changes and sense of connectedness as well, which was quite amazing, I found.
Yeah, and for many of the fathers, having that 4 or 5 days or however long it is without their phones and their watches and their computers, just thinking about what's been going on is profound. And we share stories where we sit in a circle, man, boy, man, boy, man, boy, and we ask the fathers to share stories about, what was it like for them when they were teenagers, and what sort of relationships do they have with their own fathers and their own mothers, and what have been some of their successes and failures, and how do they want to be moving forward. And that is, imagine if every single person at whatever age, every few years, had a few days time out just to reflect on what's been going on and to think about, what could I do to become a better person, and what do I need to let go of because it's really not working for me. That would be life-changing, and that's what we're trying to encourage.
Where do you see the future, Arne, for Rites of Passage?
My aim is to make rites of passage mainstream again, that it becomes normal, that every boy should be going through a rite of passage and every girl should be going through a rite of passage, and that we should really be recognising the major transition points in people's lives, when they leave school, when they get into a serious relationship, when they have children, when they become grandparents, when they move to a new job or become elders. All of those significant points are a time for reflection, and I would like to see rites of passage happening around each of them. And I look at it like life is a staircase, and we're all on that staircase, and each step represents a stage in life, and rites of passage are the healthiest, best way to mark and acknowledge and celebrate moving from one step to the next. And we all will move up that staircase, but as a doctor, I saw that many, many people go up that staircase in they almost get kicked up the stairs, and it's very traumatic and often wounding and damaging. And I'd like to see that happen in a healthy way. And I'd also like to see that we create a scenario where children can really be children again, and that adults can find their passion and be supported to have space to do that, and that we respect elders once again and see the incredibly important role they have. And so rites of passage, when they're brought in a healthy way into the community, they help maintain a healthy social structure.
Arne, what is it to be a good man these days?
I think what it is to be a good man is to have a set of values that are your own values that you recognise and that you live by, and that to be a good man is to find your own gifts and your spirit and genius and to bring that out into the world. And I also think, very importantly, to be a good man is to be looking to form healthy relationships and to support the next generation of boys and girls on their journey.
And if you had a story that you could tell a 14-year-old and he'd listen, what would the story be?
Well, if I was going to tell a 14-year-old a story, I would tell them about when I was 14. And I would tell them about what my life, and actually 14 was a real struggle time for me. I would share that with them. And I would also share with them what happened from there and things I went. And then importantly, a big part of my story would be to allow a significant amount of time for that 14-year-old to ask me questions, and any questions that they wanted to ask me.
Any questions?
Any questions. Doesn't mean I'm going to answer all of them, but even in the asking the questions, it's a powerful process. And hopefully I can in some way answer all of those questions.
Arne Rubinstein, thank you so much for your time today. On behalf of all us here at Understanding Boys, we love your passion, your authenticity, the power of your work, we see in so many different domains. And certainly I know for myself personally, I've really benefited from the training that I've done and the work that I've seen you complete in our community and also more broadly. So we wish you well on the mission to bring rites of passage into the mainstream. And thanks again for your time today.
Thank you, Ray. Absolute pleasure.
We hope you've enjoyed this Understanding Boys podcast. Make sure you subscribe on your podcast app and please leave us a review to help grow the community. For more information about the podcast, please visit understandingboys.com.au. Until next time, thanks for listening.